everybody. Welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we have Antonio Sacre, and we are continuing our conversation about storytelling and how important it is to tell stories during this incredible, chaotic time when a lot of us are in fear. We're not sure what to do. And during the last segment, you were sharing that you've been talking to your aunties and you were talking to your dad, and he had shared a story about one of your ancestors who went through the Spanish flu. And I wanted to, if you can share like some of the aspects of that story and how it resonated with you. How did that story help you during this time right now?
That's interesting. Well, one thing I wanted to mention is as I've gotten to know you and sort of I just watched your TEDx video of you talking about
Yeah,
when your dad died and this
yeah,
powerful, sad, miserable event that I wouldn't wish on anybody became the thing that turned your life around
yeah.
over years and work and a lot of support. It sounded like. And so I want to say this because my grandmother was at the very beginning of my storytelling career. My very first stories were literally just stories my grandmother told me. And she died right before I got to a place where she could see me do it professionally. And so through that
Oh,
great,
wow. I just got chills. Wow. And is this your grandma from your which side? Your Irish American side, Irish side?
no, my father's Cuban side.
Cuban side.
So yeah, so my dad and my grandmother were born in Cuba, and they came from Cuba in 1960 during the Castro Revolution and settled in Miami. My dad ended up moving to Boston, where he met my mom, who is Irish American. So I have these two traditions. But my mom's family, they were all gone. The only grandparent I had was my Cuban grandmother,
Hmm.
and so she was hugely important to me. And I spent summers with her, and I spoke Spanish because she never spoke English. I wanted to be able to communicate with her.
Oh, sweet.
And when she died, I really just went into these schools and said, I want you to meet this woman that you're never going to meet because she's gone. But she was so important to me. And here's a story she told me. And so, and it really was just that. It was both out of grief, but also out of
Hmm.
celebration. Because the best compliment I would get is the kids would say, "Oh, your grandmother is so funny. She was amazing. So she lives
Oh,
on, right?"
yes.
And um, so this woman who I loved and had in my life for 20 amazing years, and has become the foundation piece of me. So very, cutting forward to this morning when I talked to my dad, and he said, "Did I ever tell you about?" So again, there's that chain that my dad is keeping alive, and who knows how long I'll keep it alive for my own kids. But his great grandmother said, "We've been through this before, and we came out of it stronger." There's one thing,
Mm.
yeah. My grandmother used to say, I'll translate, "No hay mal que por bien no venga." It's a saying, it's a dicho or a proverb that Cubans say, and many cultures have them for sure. And basically, it's, in English, it loosely translates as every cloud has a silver lining. So whenever we would go through something bad, a girl would dump me, or I would not get on the baseball team, or I made a mistake, or I had a fender bender, my grandmother would say, "No hay mal que por bien no venga, niño." There's nothing bad that something good won't come out of it. Every
Mm.
silver lining. So right now we're in the middle of it. We're in the middle of the bad, right? What is good that's going to come out of this? We don't know. But my grandmother told me that there's nothing bad, that something good eventually won't come from it.
Hmm.
When I was so I'm constantly talking to my grandmother. I don't believe that she's right here as a spirit, but I'm also like, "Hey grandmother, this bad thing is happening. What would you say now?" And she would probably say, "Ay, mijo, hay que lavar las manos. You should go wash your hands." Right? And like that is exactly my grandmother's humor. And then I would laugh about it, and then I would like, "She's right. Let me go wash my hands." And like,
Yeah.
let's get on. What's the next thing that needs to happen? Because another thing that's kind of funny, both in my career as a storyteller and the ups and downs that we have, even as a parent, the minute ups and downs as a parent. That she didn't have running water, she didn't have a refrigerator, she didn't have an education. She came here to this country with nothing. Like there's nothing bad that if I look at all the bad that she survived, and she still had humor, and she still had life and spark and excitement and story. That Okay, wait a minute, so a publisher didn't want my latest book. Okay, is that as bad as going to a foreign country where I don't know the language? No, my grandmother survived that. I can survive this rejection. uh,
Mm.
And then, I met I'm happily, lovingly married, but I was, I was in a relationship with somebody else and it didn't work out. And it was super sad for me. And, I remember my grandmother saying, there's nothing bad that something good doesn't come from it. And, cut to 2 years later, I meet the love of my life and we have two beautiful children. And so, I live with this wisdom, and I am sad when I meet people who, one, either never met those people, or they all passed away, or they're in other countries, or two, they have them in their lives and they don't have these stories. Um,
I'm one of those people, and it's so sad. It's really sad because my dad was a storyteller. He used to say, when I came back from, when I was on China, like he immigrated from China, he was talking about being on the boat and being seasick the entire time. And it's not like 1 day, 2 days, it's like 30 days of being seasick and how he overcame that. And then when, like he was the storyteller. So when he passed, and I so miss that I wasn't listening to those stories when I was younger. I wasn't interested in those stories like, yeah, yeah, dad, blah, 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 But then what happens in the Chinese culture is that we don't really, and a lot, you'd think there's Lao Tzu, there's all these people telling like these wise stories. But in my parents' generation, they didn't tell stories. So there's a missing link. So I went to my grandfather and I said, well, tell me about like, what was it like when you came over here? And he's like, it was great. They're just like little smiley faces pasted on everything and only telling the good, not the bad.
right.
And I think when those stories are truncated or like whitewashed in that way, it's a disservice. But it sounds like your parents or grandma and dad, like they told the real stories that are the meat of life. Is that what it does that feel that way for you?
It sort of does. I mean, in some ways, there it's interesting because my grandmother and my dad, this is one of the stories I do perform for adults, never wanted to talk about Cuba because they missed it so much and they were so sad
Mm,
about it. And what their view of what happened in Cuba was such a tragedy, and they had family members back in Cuba, and so they never wanted to talk about it. And I did. I did. I realized it was a missing link for me.
yeah.
And in some ways, it, I, for those who can't talk to their relatives for whatever reason, or maybe they're no longer around, I had to go about it in other ways. I had to research it myself. I had to talk to other Cubans who were willing to talk about it. My grandmother, we did a lot of laughing, and
Yeah.
whenever things got really sad, there was another joke coming right behind it because let's
Right.
yeah. So yeah, I get that. And not every family has the person who has the time or the inclination to do it. You're doing this amazing radio show. You were probably doing amazing things when you weren't sitting down and trying to get stories of your dad, right? But
Right.
then you went to your grandfather. And even this is the thing about, like, even the joke I told, what my grandmother would say 30 years later about some virus that she never could have imagined is true to the spirit of who she is, right? So
Yeah.
that the spirit of your dad is still alive in you. and
Mm.
and that's one thing I am grateful to my parents, both of them. I do feel like I knew my ancestors, even though I only met one of the four grandparents.
That's huge,
uh,
actually, to know them,
yeah,
to really know them through their stories. That's great.
yeah, yes, yes, for
Yeah,
sure.
I do think that it's nice that you actually were able to craft those stories, even though, and I get it. Like I've been working with people of called this leadership group, these young girls who are in a leadership program at their nonprofit, and they come from all different, someone is from India, someone is from Mexico, someone is from a Native American, there's someone who's from different ethnicities. And what's interesting is people want to hear their stories, but what's hard for them is when a story is told and it's not understood, or people just don't fundamentally get it, they get re-traumatized all
Ooh,
over again. So I understand, like,
yeah.
that helped me just this moment, and you describing your father and your grandmother, who it's like a hardship thinking about Cuba and leaving. That when I asked my mom, like, why did you leave China? What was it like? Like my mom lived in 9 different houses before she left China because they were just moving around, and she moved with her parents not even living in probably four out of those houses, that because things were in such flux at that time. Now she's nonplussed about this whole corona. It's like, whatever. She's just like,
I'm okay.
she said to me, if I'm gonna die, it's my time in line and I'm gonna die. Like, you cannot, like, put me in this house and make me get stuck here and, like, wash my, it's like, whatever. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna die. So she, someone who's
Ah,
lived through all of that,
oh my gosh.
they're just like, you can't throw nothing at me because she's just
Right.
gone through so much
Yeah.
upheaval and transition in her earlier life that she can't. But I do think that people who have had those experiences, they get re-traumatized by telling
Yeah.
those stories, and it makes them sad. So I get that. That would be
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
to share those stories. But
For
I
sure.
love your grandma. I want to hear some more stories about your grandma, and I want to hear a little bit about the the Cuban Irish American experience because I've got to believe that that's super interesting because there's many layers to it, right? It's an immigrant story, and it's also like I imagine it's very similar to what I experience, right? Because I'm a first generation Chinese, so I'm like you're constantly balancing at least two cultures. You're balancing three culture. So I want to hear a little bit about that experience in the next segment. Um,
Sounds
so I love the stories of your grandma. You can hear more storytelling by Antonio Sacre by going to his book. My Name is Cool, and his new released MP3, World's Second Best Dad. Thank you for being here.
my pleasure.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show and would love your support in any way by giving me comments below or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.